Hey guys, it's time for chapter 12 of Burrick Saga. And I've had this chapter in my head as the big scary deadline for permanent recruitments that I've been dreading for the whole run, but now that it's here, we're pretty chill. Most of my recruitments are already guaranteed to happen. So this is getting close to the end of the game, and it's starting to show some teeth. This map ends up being pretty tricky, but we'll get to that. Firstly, we're going to rehire Owen, and the reason for that is that he has a couple of status healing orbs, because a status condition is a big problem in the upcoming map, but again I'll go into that in more detail shortly. Laurentia returns to us after ditching for the previous map, so I have to give her all of her stuff back, which is kind of annoying and it's going to take some time, but as a reward for letting her run away for that, we get a special item called the Shining Shield, and that's going to come in extremely handy later on, thanks to its special property of being able to negate dark magic sometimes. Unfortunately, it has a fairly high rank of 20, so Laurentia herself isn't going to be the one using it, but we'll see how that shakes out later on. There's a little more item management going on here. Most of it isn't particularly important, but one thing that is handing the health charm that we got on drop in the last map to Sherpa. Sherpa is an extremely bulky unit, as we have come to know, and so he is going to benefit greatly from having passive healing, even though it's only a little bit at a time. We're going to see that there will be times when that healing is enough to make him not need a heal in some future maps, so that's really good, and I'm glad that I managed to pick that up. Vice is a bounty target, so we get to hand that in for the full bounty because we were forced to capture him, and I believe he's the only bounty target in this entire run that I captured instead of just killing, so the extra money from being forced to do that is kind of nice as well. And then the next thing we have is Enid's promotion, and we are going to get a little glimpse in this cutscene of just how powerful she now is, having turned the entire scene into a wave of fire. This promotion turns Enid from basically a liability who we were training just to get her to get Derek permanently recruited, I should say, into an actual good unit who's going to be making real contributions. We then move to the atelier to get a couple of items made for us. One of these is the Grimhild, which is going on to Sherpa because Sherpa is by far my best swordsman. And we are also going to be upgrading Silvis's Chukonu to a rapid crossbow, which is basically just the Chukonu but stronger in every way. And these two items make use of the crafting materials that we picked up over the last two maps. So that's a good thing done. Grimhild in particular is really strong, and it has a high crit rate, so Sherpa's going to be making as much use of that as he can. Next up, we're going to head to the temple to do some shopping. Owen's physic is running pretty low on uses, so despite the expense, I buy him another physic orb here. I didn't intend for Owen to be focusing as much on healing as he ends up doing in this clear, but that's how it washed out, and so buying this physic turned out to be pretty important. The other thing we get is a Vanish Stone, and just like in 11.1, this is going to be critically important to my strategy here. But obviously I will talk about that when it actually comes up. For now, we're heading for the Kingfisher Pavilion, and I was actually kind of annoyed by the food options that we got here. In the past, in this run, I have seen some foodstuffs that would give some things that would have been really helpful for this map, like increased recovery from Berserk and Sleep, and there's actually a food out there that can give Silvis the Magic Bane skill. Magic Bane actually makes a unit completely immune to status inflicting orbs, and that would have been a real help and would have allowed me to save the Vanish Stone or the money that I spent on it for later use, but unfortunately, because the Kingfisher Pavilion is entirely RNG and I have no way of controlling that, we just make do with what we have. So the alternative for Sylvis is just giving her more hit and crit rate, and we will see why that is important. The last thing I really want to draw attention to in preps is that I am bringing Christine to this map, which is weird because she's really underleveled, but as you may know, she has the swap horses skill, and she's been sitting on a sign-on stallion that I got badly injured for several chapters, and it's now reasonably healed, so she is coming to this map solely to give that horse to Reese, because Reese's sign-on stallion is pretty badly damaged as well at this stage. So now let's have a look at the map. This map is a seize map, but it doesn't require Reese to seize. Instead, it relies on a secret recruitment character that nobody told me about. Vester has appeared in the story a couple of times, but on this chapter we are actually able to turn him into a blue unit, and he is required to seize in order to clear the map. And in order to recruit him, Alvina needs to do some running around and talking to people, and so there end up being 3 major obstacles in this map, which I will discuss as they come up, and they're all kind of irritating to deal with. But first things first, we need to deal with some enemy mounted units who are sitting just beyond the first big obstacle. I have Ward dismount to avoid taking damage to his horse, and then go into range to bait one of these guys out. Ward is fairly inaccurate with the Knight Sword, and he can also get hit so that he can't counter on the first round, so he will usually leave this guy alive for Sherpa to take the kill, which Sherpa is easily capable of doing thanks to the Grimhild and his high strength in general. And this means that Sherpa, as promised, gets to level 20 and can now make use of the Zweihander to kill things, including gates, and that's going to be important later on. But the first big obstacle on this map is the Knight, who is sitting right next to where we are, between us and the remaining 2 mounted units. And he's really tricky to deal with, because he is holding an Amaterasu shield, and what that does is that on a block it will give him plus 18 resilience against all the types of magic that we have access to, and that makes him extremely durable against any damage that we can throw against him. Thanks to his shield there, he has about a 90% chance of activating that shield block, so it will usually happen, and we need to find ways to deal damage through it. Unfortunately, there are no good alternatives to killing him, so we just have to kind of hunker down and do it if I want to hit the lowest possible turn count, which, as it turns out, I do. The second major obstacle in this map is the central island, where there are 4 ballisticians. They start out pointing in all different directions, so there's a couple of turns before they can all be brought to bear upon us, but the closest one is able to start shooting us pretty much immediately. And so Laurentia's role in this map is to fly straight towards them and start killing them. For this, she is going to be using the Lady Sword, because it has the highest crit rate against these guys. It is not guaranteed to one-hit KO the ballisticians, even on a critical hit, but it has a fairly good chance to do so, and so the increased critical as well as the increased accuracy matters more. Back to the Knight roadblock. We are waiting for him to take his action on this turn because he also has a healing item, and he will happily use that to erase any damage that we do manage to put on him. Hence, we push back our actions as long as possible until he uses his turn, and we are ready to unleash the plan we have for dealing with him. And the first half of that is, of course, Clifford charging in with the Iron Lance from almost maximum movement, and that manages to put some significant damage on even through the shield. But next up is Enid, who I already hinted is very powerful now, and this is thanks to her orb, the Pallas Leia. This thing has a completely ridiculous 32 might, which means that she has 39 attack thanks to her 5 magic plus the promotion bonus. The Pallas Leia is also extremely accurate, so she's going to be extremely useful for just deleting most regular enemies. Sherpa finishes off the Armor Knight, managing to kill due to the Armor Knight not activating his shield for once. and that leaves the way clear. Unfortunately, this also leaves Enid in range of the Lance Knight, who will easily one-shot her, but fortunately he decides not to try and kill her until we are able to put someone else between him and her. The next move we make is Alvina heading off towards the northern village. The story here is that Vester has been severely injured, and so she needs to head to talk to someone in the northern village to get a special item that will heal him and allow him to join our army temporarily. So off she goes, and it's notable that she has an 8-move horse by default, and in fact so does Vester, so everyone relevant to the movement required for clearing this map in the lowest turn count has the maximum possible move they could already, so that's pretty good. The Lance Knight has now charged in, so we are able to focus and eliminate him on this turn, which means he's no longer a threat to my fragile units. And we also eliminated the ballistician that's closest to us on the second turn, so now we've got a decently safe zone to start moving in. Owen is deployed on this map largely because I wanted to have his Pacify Orb available, but as you will see, this was a futile hope because his 3 movement is just so garbage that even moving as quickly as he can, he just isn't anywhere near close enough to make use of that. So Owen is relegated to just physicking in this map. So now let's talk about these ballistae. These have been a major thorn in my side on several attempts of this map because they are capable of one-hit KOing many of my more fragile units. And I kept losing because I forgot to take into account their rotated range after their turn had ended, and so got someone killed at the start of the next turn, so that was pretty bad. Alvina talks to Skaro here and receives the holy water that's needed to cure Vester, so that's phase 1 of the map complete, and Alvina now needs to turn around and head south with the rest of my army. An alternative path towards Skaro that could have bypassed the Armor Knight would have been to head directly left from the starting point, and then go down the cliff to reach the village, but this would have ended up costing a turn because of how expensive it is for a mounted unit to cross a cliff. They have to dismount to get on it at all, and that just cost a whole turn, which I didn't want to waste. Reese is fairly safe where he is. He has Gram equipped, and I'm relying on the Miracle Charm effect on that to keep him from dying to some random stuff, and I'm pretty happy to have that as a failsafe for him. So now most of the enemy has been eliminated. We only have a couple of Axe Guards to worry about, the Ballistae notwithstanding, and they're going to fall pretty easily. There are actually some more enemies nearby. In the forest, there are 3 enemies with Hide and Overwatch, and they are extremely dangerous to anyone not durable going down there, because those Overwatches will trigger while you are on the cliffs and thus have 0 avoid. However, their AI is set to not move, so they will only be triggered when I want to, now that I know about them. This is frustrating for Sylvis and Owen in particular, because they would have liked to take the shorter route to cut off some spaces while the cavalry had to go the long way around, but we just have to live with it, and that's what we do. You can see that I'm being exceptionally diligent in checking the ballista ranges now, so that I don't put anyone in danger. And with that, I'm going to talk about Enid again, because she is one of the units who is in real danger, and despite having the most powerful attack in the entire army at this point, she is still extremely fragile, so thoroughly a glass cannon that we have to be very careful of. She's absolutely worth bringing though, because as I mentioned, she has 39 magical attack with that thing, and most enemies barely have 1 magic, so they're not going to be surviving very well. In fact, if an enemy has 38 HP or less, then they will just die in 1 hit to the Parlor Slayer. That's how useful she is. She is an emergency nuke against one enemy, any enemy that we want, pretty much. Volo is another unit who we have to be reasonably careful of the ballisticians with, although his avoid is fairly solid. Unfortunately, he does absolutely nothing for this entire map, and that means I could have deployed someone more useful instead, but I'll come to that later. So on the start of turn 4, we obviously want to move in and kill one of these ballisticians first to make some room. So obviously that's why I don't do that. Instead, Alvina is going to rush down and accidentally gets in range of 2 ballisticians, which isn't great for her because she gets 2 KO'd. But she needs to move fairly early because otherwise there's a chance that she can get walled in by the red units who are trying to kill the green units. Speaking of the green units, I hate to abandon them, but they do serve as a very effective distraction. In fact, they even managed to pull away the 3rd mounted enemy, so he's going to be completely irrelevant for the rest of the map because he's too busy murdering helpless farmers instead of soldiers. I have Dean trigger one of the enemies with Overwatch. He gets vengeful and one-hit KOs them, but I leave the others alone because there's really no reason to go into that forest anymore. And because I have a good plan for the final stages of this map, he does need to be quick to get across the ford that everyone's heading for in order to be useful down there. So at this point I finally realize that Alvina is in 2 ballista ranges, so Larentia flies over and manages to kill one. I'm extremely grateful for this crit because otherwise Alvina would have been at real risk of death. Now if you'll notice, there's a transporter on the center of the island that Larentia is flying around killing ballisticians on. This guy's name is Pentland, and if we managed to get Alvina over to talk to him, he would turn green, and he would additionally turn all of the surviving ballisticians green as well, which you'd think would be really helpful, but Alvina already has way too much to do on this map, so it's just never going to happen, unfortunately, although it could be a funny thing to do in a more casual run. So another thing about Enid that didn't get fixed by her promotion is her 4 movement, so she's unable to come in and unleash her Palace Lair on anyone because my other units are in the way, so someone else is going to have to deal with that. And then we're all going to be heading down to the ford that I mentioned. Crossing this is a real pain for my cavalry units because they can only move across it at the rate of 1 space per turn. And that means that we really have to pick and choose which of them gets over there. Sylvis is definitely going to be rushing to get across this because she has a really important role at the end of the map. So she is the second priority behind Alvina, and everyone else is just going to have to do the best they can. But Clifford also has some level of priority because he's the one carrying the shining shield that I need to get over there at some point. The Axe Guards are now dead, so there is basically no more resistance in this entire map until we reach the final castle that we have to seize. These next few turns feel very relaxed by comparison to the previous few. Obviously the ballisticians can still shoot at us if we get in their range, but Larentia's done a good job of taking out the most threatening ones already, and the remaining 2 will not take her very long to deal with either. Alvina, interestingly, can cross 2 ford tiles in a single turn, and I believe this is entirely because her horse has 8 movement instead of 7, and so she can afford to lose some tiles because she's going to be rammed up against the edge of that ford anyway. So now let's turn our attention to the castle. The boss is sitting there, but there are also 3 armored knights, and they will gradually start to move out towards us. Enid is extremely helpful in dealing with them because, as I've alluded to, she one-shots them, and they are otherwise very difficult to kill physically. They are going to go for the civilians in the second village, but we're going to get there in plenty of time to prevent them from meeting the same fate as the northern village. So between now and the next save point, there's very little combat going on. Pretty much the only thing we need to rely on the RNG for is Larentia killing these ballisticians. And that means that it's fairly easy to rig that to happen, which is important as I'll get into later on. I have been extremely careful with Larentia around the remaining ballista ranges, always making sure to canter her to somewhere where she does not get targeted at all, which keeps her safe. You may notice that there's a sparkling spot in the river. This is one of the civilian request targets that we can do in this map, but unfortunately I don't end up doing it. For some reason Larentia is able to search that spot and pick it up, but she has something else to do, so she can't do it. And If I had not deployed Volo, who does nothing, and had instead deployed Axel, I would have easily been able to pick that up, but I didn't, so I don't manage to get this. Laurentia's next task after dealing with the ballisticians is to fly to the left towards the castle and to start breaking down one of the gates in, because we cannot get enough power over there in order to break it down later on when Vesta is approaching it. So we need Laurentia to make a start on that as soon as she possibly can, and that means we need to make sure that the ballisticians die as quickly as possible too. Honestly, I'm sick and tired of fighting these damn 100 HP doors. They're starting to be more annoying than any of the enemies I'm fighting, but obviously Kage has not finished putting them in my way, so I just have to suck it up and grumble quietly. Anyway, Alvina loses a space here, but I already mentioned before that she doesn't really care. She can afford to lose several spaces in the process and still get to Vesta as quickly as she possibly could, so that's no big problem, and it pays to get her out of ballista range as quickly as possible. Nothing particularly interesting is happening. I'm clustering all of my units around the choke point, obviously, and the second armor knight has started to move out to meet us, but we have plenty of time before we will reach him because, you know, he has 3 movement and we don't really care about him. Laurentia attacks the last ballista and does not get a critical hit, which is a little unfortunate, but fortunately she has Adept as a backup means for one-rounding ballisticians, so she gets that, and now she can move on to her next task. But she needs to watch the ranges in the castle, because the boss is pretty nasty, and if he gets to cast a spell at her, then that pretty much ruins the entire run. Fortunately, she is able to sit outside of his range and canto in and out to destroy the door without getting targeted. In fact, avoiding being targeted by the boss is pretty much the main challenge of the last part of this map, but I'll come to that in a few minutes. With the death of the last ballistician, the rest of my units are now absolutely safe from harm, and there aren't any units currently deployed on the map that can attack Laurentia either. So this next turn is very safe and calm, and nothing can possibly go wrong. And this is in large part only true because of the green units in the northern village who are getting slaughtered, because their accuracy really isn't the greatest against these Imperial troops, and they have no chance of survival without us. Them fighting does take up an annoying amount of time, but given their contribution to the strategy, I'm kind of happy to let them do that, and they will not have died in vain, and that includes our friend Scaro, so let's pour one out for him, because he gave us the holy water that we needed, and then we abandoned him, but he fought the good fight to the very end. He kept using physic to help out his friends, and so he dies a true hero of this run. Back to the choke point. It's important to keep in mind the prioritization of units here. Clifford needs to carry the Shining Shield over to Vesta, and obviously Alvina needs to go over to recruit Vesta in the first place. But after them, I want to prioritize some of my hit boosting auras, so Reese is next in line, along with Enid. Laurentia begins having a go at the gate, and she makes a good start, getting a critical hit. And that's kind of important because Laurentia is not really capable of breaking this down entirely with just regular hits. So we did need 1 or 2 crits to cut off over the next couple of turns. The green units in the southern village have not yet been attacked, and we are going to get there in time to protect them. One of them in particular at the bottom needs to be talked to by any of our units to fulfill the second civilian request of this map. And I do that because that gives us a couple of bags. In fact, Clifford takes the time to do it because he was the first unit to get across that annoying choke point. But now it's just about time to start discussing the main boss of this map. This is a raised bishop named Almarcus, and we have seen him before back in chapter 10, but at that point he ran away like a coward, and this time we have to actually fight him. And that's really annoying because he has a berserk orb, and last time we saw a berserk orb, it only had one use, and the game handed us a cure item for it immediately, so it didn't really matter at all. But this time he has a full 20-use Berserk Orb, and that means that we cannot afford to send our units too close to him, or they will effectively turn into red units. And unlike in the GBA Fire Emblem games and several others, enemy status magic in this game does not have any mischance. It's guaranteed to activate as long as the attacker has more magic than the target. Almarcus has really high magic, and none of my units have any chance of getting close to it at all, so they are all guaranteed to just get whacked. And that's a problem, because we need to get Vester in there to seize in the lowest turn count possible, and so we need to find a way around this. And that is, of course, where the Shining Shield comes in. The Shining Shield is a really useful shield, although as mentioned it has a high rank, but Vester's base level is 26, the highest in the game, so he can of course use it. And what it does is it has a 2/3 chance when you are targeted with dark magic to completely nullify it, whether it's a damaging spell or a status inflicting spell. So that means that Vester has a pretty good chance of nullifying the effects of the Berserk Orb. We still want to minimize the number of times that he gets targeted with it, of course, but he has to go in there and we are going to have to rely on the Shining Shield at least once. Now, there are enemies on this map who drop more sedatives. In fact, one of them has just appeared, the Raise Priest. And this is one of the very few ways to get a sedative prior to the end of this map, but it is way too late for us. You cannot buy sedatives, and the only one previously droppable was back in 1.2, where I had to use it to clear the map in 7 turns. So I had no sedatives going into this map. And obviously Owen's Pacify isn't an option because his movement is too low, so the Shining Shield really came at a very opportune time. Now Sylphus is going to move in, and she is the most important part of this strategy. She makes use of the Vanish Stone to avoid being targeted by Berserk, and you'll notice that she is now within 3 range of the boss. And she is going to be making use of her 3 range attack skill, Deadeye, in order to kill him over the next couple of turns. Doing this as soon as possible is important so that other units can move in to support Vester in the final stretch of the map. Now, let's go over the Berserk status and why I hate it so much in this game. Now obviously, Berserk status, like in other games, means that a player unit is now able to attack other player units. But it's even worse than usual in this game, because it essentially turns them into red units completely. They cannot attack other red units while they are berserked, and they count as red units for determining whether you can move through their space, so it's really annoying. The only plus side is that you can wall them off from your weaker allies if you want. However, that may not be the best idea, because when a berserk unit attacks one of your unit will counter them. So in general, if a berserk unit gets into combat, there is a very high risk that someone is going to die, which obviously I want to avoid at all costs. Honestly, the combination of 20 uses and perfect accuracy in this particular map make it a real nightmare scenario, so the Shining Shield really did come just in time. I don't want to leave the green units to their fates down here, so I did have Enid kill one already, and Clifford is moving to attack another one, and this Armored Knight has the Fury hidden skill, so he is going to charge at Clifford now rather than trying to kill the green units anymore, which is a very interesting mechanic that I haven't really commented on all that much, but it has been useful once or twice. At this point I trade off Reese's weapons. The intent behind this was to create a completely harmless unit that could go into Berserk range and potentially draw Berserk aggro away from Vester, but that didn't end up happening, really. The AI will target people with no usable offensive weapons. I'm not certain whether they'll target someone with no weapons at all, but I figured they probably would. I've only seen Owen targeted when he had no offensive orbs, but he still had healing spells, so maybe. Anyway, Vester only moved 2 spaces this turn, but he couldn't reach the seize point from where he was to seize this turn anyway, so he could have moved to pretty much any tile that he wanted to. So it's not as big a deal that he moved through 2 forest tiles and ate his entire move with it. And then Almarcus attempts to berserk him, and the Shining Shield activates, preventing that from occurring, so that's great. And he's now in position to seize next turn at least, as long as we can get rid of Almarcus by then. And we're also going to have to deal with some of the reinforcements that are continuously spawning out here, because they can very easily get in the way. We actually managed to cripple the Armor Knight here with Clifford, and that's pretty cool because it means we get to capture him, and I used Sherpa to do so, but I probably should have checked his inventory first because he actually doesn't have enough spaces in there to take all of the items. And the end result of that is that I need to chuck away the large shield from the Armor Knight. It's a bit unfortunate because one of the items taking up space in Sherpa's inventory is the broken Brim Ranger, and if I had remembered to trade that off him before this map, this wouldn't have happened and I would have been able to keep that shield, but oh well, it's just one of those things that you can't change. Laurentia is now being targeted because there are enemies with 1 and 2 range in the pack now, but she manages to dodge for now, and that's quite important because she's going to be taking a few of these hits. Vester is attacked by the Raise Priest as well, and once again the Shining Shield goes off, preventing damage just as effortlessly as it prevented Vester from being berserked. So that's really nice and handy, and I think I'm going to be keeping this Shining Shield around because it's super useful. At this point I do need to start moving some of my other units into the berserk range, so it's now really urgent that we kill Almarcus in 2 turns, and Sylva starts that job here now. She's using the sniper arrows on this turn, and with them she has 5% crit, which isn't much, but if it goes off it's extremely helpful, because the sniper arrows are very accurate. She wasn't in range of Reese here, so she didn't have 100 hit, but she would have if he had been in range. And because we didn't get a crit, we are going to have to rely on lower hit rates to finish him off. Enid moves in to kill off the 3rd Armor Knight with the Palace Lair, once again demonstrating how powerful she is now, and she gets some money from doing that. But she can afford to do that because at this point it's clear that she is not going to be able to help us with beating down the gates. Said gate still has 30 HP, but unfortunately the reinforcements have crowded in and blocked us off from attacking it this turn, so Laurentia is instead going to have to kill one of the enemies in the way. And unfortunately this means that next turn we're going to have to get a fair amount of units through to push through these and break the gate. Dean charges in to help out with that. He attacks an Axe Guard from the group that was murdering green units, and he does this because he gets money drop from that, but also he gets to show off his shiny new Bouge, which is the axe that he got for being permanently recruited. And this is a plus weapon, and it makes Dean an extremely reliable combat unit even without desperation now. So Dean is now pretty much a juggernaut capable of fighting entire armies with minimal support, and I'm really grateful for having another unit who's that strong to stand alongside Sherpa. So Almarcus tends to act quite early in the turn, so in order to prevent any of our units from being berserked, we have to kill him ASAP, and Sylvis is capable of doing that. As I mentioned, she needs to get a crit to finish him now, and the 51 hit and 30-ish% crit is more likely to happen than a 5% crit, so we go with that option, and we manage to get it. So Almarcus is now dead, and we don't have to worry about Berserk anymore. However, we do still need to worry about getting through these remaining enemies, and also we need to worry about Laurentia being attacked, which means she's now going to die horribly, isn't she? But somehow she manages to dodge instead, and that means we are still in the game. Dean moves in to clear out the Raise Priest, and that also means that anyone who tries attacking him is as good as dead, because Dean is now really strong, and I've equipped his Bouge still, so anyone attacking him is going to die. And we get the sedative drop off the Raise Priest, which is completely irrelevant now because the Berserk guy is dead. Vester is then attacked from a really annoying position, and because of the Nightsword being generally inaccurate, he fails to 1-round KO. So that means we are now in a really tight place, and we need everything to go our way. I move Reason at this point so that he can give some extra hit rate with his Commander skill. I possibly should have done that sooner, but it turns out alright really in the end. But as I said, at this point everything has to go absolutely perfectly, or we just fail and have to reset. Because of this, when Laurentia moves in to make her attack, she uses the Lady Sword, because the Lady Sword is capable of giving her 100 listed hit, which is a rare sight in this game, I find. And that was the last possible use on that Lady Sword, but it went to a very good cause, so rest in peace, O Lady Sword. We will not forget you. Anyway, then the next guy moves out to attack Vester, and this really pissed me off because this guy has a shield, and if he activates it even once, Vester would not 1-round KO. But by some miracle, it didn't happen. And all that was left between us and the seize point was the door. So I had Alvina come in because she was the last unit who could possibly do it, and the faux shard is the only weapon she has strong enough to pull it off. And somehow, by some miracle, she didn't break it in the middle. I was absolutely praying for this to happen, and Vester is able to move in and seize to complete this map in 11 turns. That's all, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.